And I want to say hello to everyone again. This is the new channel that is going to talk about truth from fiction. And the reason for the channel is to express my opinion about the history of the world. The history of the world is important, in my opinion, because what we know about what has happened may help us be able to avoid duplicating the same problems in order to go forward with something else. What has happened is what people remember at the time. Ranching, which would include all of the domestication of animals, livestock. In addition, we had people that were starting to manufacture and engage in trading. As we were moving from hunters and gatherers, as the different groups were growing in size, they came in more constant contact with each other. It's my belief that something like this is what happened that caused the beginning of the Philistines. And that is that some of the Amazon women, as they would kill their game and light a campfire at night and start cooking, in the morning, they started noticing yellow balls in the ash of the fire after it cooled off the next day. And they would save these yellow balls. One day, one of the men happened to notice it and expressed to the Amazon woman that if you give that to me, I'll make you some earrings and a necklace. And so she gave it to him. She figured she had several already. And so if she lost that one, it would be no great loss. She got the earrings and bracelet, or the necklace, earrings and necklace, and she was so excited that she had to tell her friends about it. And as they continued dealing with these gentlemen, they finally got to the point within, I think, one generation that they decided to form together as a community. And in doing so, the men already knew the women were not going to take a second place position with the men. They were not going to be considered second class citizens. And therefore, from the very beginning, the men realized they had to work with the women instead of using their power to subjugate the women. So as they continued working, in my other video, I gave them the date of 5550 BC. The reason I settled on that date was from the information that I obtained by watching the videos and understanding the history of the world and the copper tools that were being manufactured at the time. I concluded that it was probably the Philistine people that were doing the manufacturing and distributing, because I know that when we look at kenosis, I am absolutely convinced without a doubt that those were the Philistines. So we can conclude that the beginning of the Philistines, who is what the Plato called the Atlantans, and he didn't call them the Atlantans for their beginning. He called them the Atlantans because of what they had achieved. What they had achieved was a society that Plato referred to as a utopian society. Now, the date that I used only gave them about a 4,000 year existence before they were destroyed with the volcano on Thera. If you take the writing that is on the walls of Egypt, there's one of two possibilities. Number one, people could be mistranslating the date. Or number two, the date of 9600 BC was when the Amazon women and the Greek men first got together and started the Philistine society. Now, when the Philistines were destroyed, if they had bragged with the community, and it was general knowledge in the area that they began at 9600 BC, then that's why it would end up on the walls of Egypt. Now, whether that is true or it was just a mistake, I don't have an opinion about. It's possible that they actually went for 8,000 years, but I am going to use what I considered a reasonable one amount and say 4,000 years when I talk about them. Because when they started a community where they were doing some trading. The fact that they made the jewelry for the women showed that they were manufacturing things, and being able to understand where the gold came from, that probably helped enlarge their community as well. They started trying to figure out what other metals could the rocks. That's how they discovered copper. That's how they came across the tin that eventually led to their bronze. But it was their history that we cannot tell you what day, what year that these things happened. We know that they got started someplace because they were in existence when they were destroyed. So they had a beginning, and I'm telling you as close as I can figure out what their beginning was probably like. Now, as they continued to do the trading and the manufacturing, it's clear from the information we have that the bronze did not just accidentally occur to several people that were not in communication with each other at the same time. It was a result of someone trading with them that had the information or the bronze itself to trade. Now, it's my conclusion that the Philistines are the ones that were manufacturing the bronze. The reason that I can conclude that is when they were wiped off the face of the planet on 1550 BC. That basically was the end of their smelting plants, the end of their manufacturing, and the end of over 99% of their society. As I explained before, everything was cremated in a 24-hour period. But what we're talking about now is the period before that time, the period that they had lasted for 4,000 years, the period that gave them the title of Utopian Society by Plato. Now, Plato referred to them in that nature, in my opinion, for two reasons. Number one, all citizens of the society were totally equal. There were no slaves in the society. There were no second-class citizens. The human beings there treated every other human being as an equal. Even when they went out to trade, they did not try to use their trading superiority to subjugate the people they were trading with. They tried to trade with them on a straight up, honest nature where they would get something out of the trade and the people they were trading with would accomplish something from the trade. We know from history that when communities manufacture and trade with each other, everyone prospers better. It's only when people start destroying that things become hard to come by, in short supply, and not available, and then it leads to people trying to steal what they cannot create on them for themselves. That is why I refer to the time since the destruction of the Philistines as the murder and mayhem years. But in this video, I'm not talking about the murder and mayhem years. I will get into that as we start talking in other videos about my book on religion and my book on politics. As I get into those areas, I will cover what I think is the truth from the fiction there as well. The reason for creating this video is so that people that understand the truth and copy the actions that other people have had will get similar results to what those people had. So it seems to me like if one nation, whoever they are, chooses to make the women absolutely equal in the society and start communicating with everyone around them with the equality of the women in the society, they can duplicate what the Philistines had. Now, I'm here to talk about the Philistines and their society, and so that's what I'm going to do. I think the Philistines were Greek men from the Romanian or Northern Greek area, and I think the Amazon women participants would come run across each other as the societies multiplied, as they ran across each other and had this interaction and started working together. They formed a society that probably started close by, or in my opinion, started on Thera, because one of the reasons for getting together was the men were making jewelry for the women. So they were in the manufacturing business at that time. Now, as we continue on from that, they continued manufacturing what they could, and they continued to grow their manufacturing industry so that it would eventually include wine, olive oil, and grains. A lot of grains were traded. They were able to trade with other societies. The Norwegian countries had amber, which people coveted, and so amber was a part of the trading items. Also from India, people had spices that were not available to the people in the central Mediterranean. So the trading included the people from India as well. So the trading routes that were basically created and continued in existence was the result of the trading power that the Philistines were continually engaging in. They would continue to develop new items when they became necessary, and that's how they ran across the bronze. In their experimentation, they came across bronze. Bronze was a metal that was superior to wood, and they then started making things that needed more strength with more stability and longer use than the wood items could produce. So as the amber was traded and the spices from the Indian area, the manufacturers ran across the idea of putting tin in with the copper and creating bronze. They used this bronze not only with the tin, but I think they experimented a little with arsenic as well. But in creating the bronze, they made a metal that was plenty good enough for the world at that time. We only have to remember that it was after the destruction of the Philistines in 1550 BC that it became obvious that a bronze sword that was primarily used for farming or ranching or for hunting and gathering, whatever the bronze knife is used for, now needs to be used for fighting, because people began fighting with each other after the Philistines were removed from the picture. Now, this fighting, once that happened, it became very apparent, and this is something that I will add in my later videos when I talk about the religion and talk about Moses and the Israelites. I will talk about iron, because in the Bible, they make it clear that the Philistines knew how to make iron. Now, the Philistines that knew how to smelt and no longer could get the copper and the tin to make bronze did have the ability to make iron. It was harder to work with, and there was not nearly the market for it there was for the bronze, except for weapons. People that wanted iron swords found that iron swords were superior to the bronze swords, and now iron became the metal of choice. Everyone pretty much by this time knew how to make bronze. So bronze was not an issue from this point forward. It was just a matter of what you wanted to make the bronze for. But back at the time that they were building their community, they concentrated on manufacturing what the people wanted. And they did use bronze figurines. They made anything that we can see that was traded in the Mediterranean, what came from the Philistines and their trading progress. As I said before, the Philistines included anyone that wanted to trade. We clearly know that India traded with them. We clearly know that the Hittites traded with them. We know that the Philistines were agreeable to work with anyone. They worked with the Sumerians at the southern end of the Levant and the Tigris and Euphrates River, where it dumps into the Indian Ocean, and the gateway to India. And that's what made Samaria prosper at that time as well. During the trading empire, Samaria was the major start of the trading route. And they added, in addition to the spices, they started farming as well. So not only did they have farming, but they had the trading that supported the community. It was only after the trading dried up that everyone in the area began to suffer. Now, when the Philistines were destroyed, there was no more bronze being made, but there was enough bronze around that could be traded among the people that were still willing to trade with each other until it totally dried up in the society. From 1550 to 1200 BC, which is 350 years, it took that long before other people would agree that the Bronze Age ended. That's only because the Philistines, over the 4,000 years, had so much bronze in the society that people could just now melt down the bronze and make weapons if that's what they wanted to convert their bronze material into. But the problem that people had was, without the Philistines and their trading society, the Hittite community totally disappeared. Now, we know that the boat people were sometimes blamed for that, but you have to remember, with the volcano eruption and the 100-foot of ash that it put on Santorini, and the fact that it went from around 300 feet above sea level to about 1,000 foot below sea level, that all of that material, land, and people turned into ash and vapor, that the volcano put so much ash chemicals into the atmosphere that I've heard rumors that the area around European trading partners changed for about 300 years. The weather patterns were no longer similar to the weather patterns before the eruption. So that means that people that were growing material to trade, those communities disappeared. The Hittite community no longer had enough rain to make their agricultural land even produce. So they were going to dry up, and the boat people just added to the problem. The boat people were people that had to move from Europe down south of the Mediterranean, because everything north of the Mediterranean had been affected by the ash in the atmosphere. So for the next 300 years, it's a very volatile time for everyone. History tells us that the Hittite community completely abandoned their cities because the land was no longer able to support them. And you have to remember that during the Philistine Empire, the land did not have to do the whole job. The trading empire supplied whatever was needed if they could not produce it. So these areas primarily dried up because the trading dried up. All the others were just what you would call additional problems on the major problem. The communities in the Canaanite communities in the Levant, those cities were abandoned as well. Now, when I talk about Israel, we have to remember the problem started at 1550 BC, and by 1180, everyone agrees people had already made adjustments and were starting to restructure their communities so they could rebuild. Unfortunately, one of the restructuring systems that got used, and evidently it got started in the northern part of Germany, and that was, since we don't have trading, we will fight. There evidently was a conflict that went on there even before the Egyptians fought with the Hittites. But when the Egyptians fought with the Hittites, it was during that same time period that the people were fighting in Germany. So once the Philistines and their influence was gone, the horsepower engine of males is what took over. Women in every community was subjugated to second-class citizens. The communities chose to have kings who could have multiple wives if they wanted them. The women were no longer equal. There were a few attempts along the way, and they will be talked to later, about people like Cyrus the Great that tried to give women more equality. What Cyrus created was closer to what the Philistines had in their society as well. What I want to do is have the people understand if we do the acts the Philistines did, we probably will get the same result. And I'm drawing this conclusion on the fact that I do believe in a supreme being. I think with or without a supreme being, there are laws. What we want to call them laws or not, we can call them anything else you want to refer to them as. But I'm going to use the law of gravity. Is if you step off of a cliff on a high mountain, the law of gravity is going to take you down. Now, are laws absolute? Not necessarily. There seems to be exceptions to everything, and it's the exceptions that help blur the truth. What I want to do is to take the blurring away and help human beings understand what is true is actually true and will have results that will benefit humanity. What is believed to be true that is false may not lead to the result that human beings want. So by understanding the truth of history and duplicating what those people did, it's my opinion we will duplicate their results. Now, as I talk about the Philistines, we know that they went for 4,000 years. I'm not going to try to cover everything they did during that 4,000 years, but I will cover the things that seem logical to me. The Philistines were trading very sufficiently with Egypt during the time the Great Pyramids were built. Now, the Great Pyramids were built, and there's a lot of uncertainty that we have. I have heard when I was in school that slavery was the thing that built everything. We have recently discovered that Egypt probably did not have slaves. Now, slavery came about as a result of the horsepower engine getting out of control. So slavery did come on, but probably not until the Philistines were gone. So how did the pyramids get built? Well, it's not really rocket science. All of the things that they were providing, like Egypt had no lumber, their trading community would bring the material from the Levant, and back in that time, the Canaanites were in the hill area, which was more of the trading routes. The people that were down on the coastline became known as the Phoenicians. Now, the Phoenicians get their title that they actually earned after the Philistines were destroyed. And that's when the Philistines that were placed in the 5 cities next to the Phoenicians did not have the trading capabilities any longer and were acquainted with the Phoenicians because the Phoenicians were the people that would pick up some seagoing trading that was in addition to what the Philistines could handle. So when the Philistines got put next to where the Phoenicians were, the Philistines immediately made agreements with the Phoenicians to do the trading. Now the Philistines immediately started making olive oil again. That was their major trading commodity. As far as the interaction between Israel and the Philistines, I'll talk about that when I talk about the religious videos. Right now, I'm only going to zero in on the actions of the Philistines. We know the Philistines had elephants and monkeys on their island. We know that because Plato told us so. And I think that we can believe Plato because he was in 400 years, he was around 2 to 300 BC, and they ceased to exist in 550 BC. So within 300 years, not only if you couldn't read their writing, the oral history of their existence was widely known. Even though people didn't know how they had gotten removed off the earth, they did know they did exist, and they did know what their accomplishments were. Now, their accomplishments could have very well been without any trouble, without using slaves. They could have used the elephants to move the rocks that were very heavy, necessary to put them in place for the Egyptians. Now, besides the pyramids, we have a couple other areas that have large stones be put in place. And one of these is in Turkey. And these stones are supposedly put in place prior to pottery being made. Now, if these stones were put in place early on at the creation of the Philistine community, as they were just getting started before they started a large trading empire, then it would be understandable because the pottery that they used is all over the Mediterranean, and it can clearly be seen that it comes from Greece, is because the pottery was their cardboard boxes of that day. The pottery had to be made to ship the commodities that were shipped, whether it was olive oil or wine or grain or things like that. They found it cheap enough and efficient enough to use the pottery to do their trading. So as we date the pottery, as it trades in the Mediterranean, you can go back and find when the Philistines actually started. Now, if the walls of Egypt are correct, and they were actually in business for 8,000 years instead of 4,000 years, that would give them a couple thousand years even to start and build the trading empire before the trading empire was all that important. But that would have been the time that they would have also had to help Egypt with their elephants build the pyramids. But once the trading empire got going, they were probably too busy to lend the know-how and the knowledge and the elephants for the Egyptians to continue building pyramids of that kind of style. But there are other areas that we don't know about. What we do know is that for at least the last 100 years of the Philistines' empire, they were bringing tin in from the British Isles. So if the Philistines made their way to Britain and saw that agricultural was a fine thing to start there and to use as part of the trading community, and saw that they had wood posts up that kind of gave people an idea of when the planting seasons were to start and how things were to be manufactured, it would be a logical assumption that they would say, we can replace the wood with stones, and then you will never lose the knowledge of knowing when to plant. So Stonehenge could have been one of the accomplishments of the Philistines when they first discovered that they needed to go to Britain in order to mine the tin. Now, in addition to that, we have in Turkey, rocks were moved very early on, even at a time that we did not even think that farming had started. But it was the responsibility of the society to hand down to the next generation the rules in order to make the society work as well as it is. And we know their society worked better than anyone else's, that they made their way over to Carthage. And the reason I know that is when Rome destroyed Carthage, they destroyed 6- and 7-story buildings. The only people on the face of the planet that seemed to know how to make multiple story buildings and the kind of plaster that would set up underwater were the Philistines. So it was the Philistines that had a hand in all of this. Now later I will also talk a little bit about the destruction of Carthage, because when I wrote my book, Carolyn, that talks about all of this, I concluded that the Philistines were wiped off the face of the earth. But just since I wrote the book, which has been less than a few months, I've already realized that that may not be the truth, that there are people that have scientific evidence that show the Philistines made their way over to South America. And they had a community in South America that was basically lasted, we don't know how long, but only the DNA that we can trace and following history as we discover it, the truth of history, will we be able to see how well these people were able to continue on. Stop the video here because this 20-minute video has now gone about 35 minutes. So I will continue the discussion of what went on in future videos. Thank you for watching, and if you appreciate this channel, please subscribe.